Welcome everyone to the Men's ADHD Support Group. My name is Shane Thrapp. I am the Operations Director of our organization. We really appreciate everybody making it today, and today we are joined by a special guest. Cameron Gott is an executive ADHD coach who has worked with creative leaders and business owners worldwide since 2000. He co-founded Center for ADHD Coaching Excellence and serves as a senior trainer at the Coach Approach Training Institute. He is a former co-host of the Translating ADHD podcast, one of the top ADHD podcasts in the world, and he's currently launched his new show, Integrating ADHD with Cameron Gott. He leads group coaching programs on relationships, self-care, and emotional work, and is currently exploring the intersection of ADHD, positive intelligence, and leadership through his coaching program. Thank you so much for coming, Cam. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Shane. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate folks coming out tonight. So it's a small group, but hopefully I can provide some insight and value here. So just know that everyone's got a busy schedule and to make time for this. So thanks for coming out. And I hope to make it a little interactive and informative. So I'll be posing some questions to folks that you can pose in the chat. And yeah, my new podcast is actually launching. So it hasn't quite cleared the deck yet. So I'm going to put that out there. So again, welcome folks. And what I'm going to do is let me go ahead and share my screen. A little bit of a slide deck here. So we'll just start with that. Good deal. When we get a diagnosis, when we're early on in our ADHD management, you might be early on, you might be years in, that there are certain pathways we take, and it's like there's so much information that's out there for us. And so the idea of identifying these early missteps is that I'm going to identify them so you can see like maybe pathways not to take and why you wouldn't want to take them. But also during the Q&A, what I want to do is talk about missteps that you may have taken and the impetus for that. Because if we look at it, then we can get an understanding of how your ADHD actually shows up. And as a coach and as a trainer, I'm very interested in helping my clients understand their ADHD and how it can be a lever or an asset, right? Or it can be something of a liability or a challenge. This first slide that I'm looking at here that I'm sharing with you is actually this ancient wood in Wales, in this area of what was called abundant natural beauty, the Gower Peninsula. And I went there to give a presentation to a group of coaches at a designated ADHD retreat center. Now, I incorporated a trip with my family into this to sort of fold that in. A colleague of mine runs the place. And it was just this awesome kind of place to create community, connection, and learning. And what Shane, what Mark, and everyone else involved with the Men's ADHD Support Group, you're doing, this is so important. The fact, this is not a misstep. But this idea of learning is so key with ADHD. And often people sort of miss that. But if you think about just nuggets of wisdom, we often get focused on time and task and management, emotional regulation. Those are all important. But we will kind of, from our experiences, we will develop some nugget of wisdom. And then it's just like us to kind of leave that wisdom on the side of the road with our working memory challenges or dynamic attention system. It's like we have this hard fought learning and then we set it aside. So I like to say that, it is about the strategies and tools and hacks, but it's also about the learning and pulling that learning forward. Just that this place that you're creating, the men's group, where there's a sense of community of coming together to look at a common dilemma. I teach a lot of classes, and this is so key, is that we want to open this window of tolerance between hypoarousal and hyperarousal. And you notice like some days when it's the worst and your back is against the wall, that window of tolerance is dropped down. But there are certain conditions where you can kind of open it up, and we want to open that up. And we do that by creating a sense of community, connection, and that optimizes learning. So just that you're doing it here, and the fact that you're here, whether you're in person or you're listening to this on the YouTube channel or accessing through email, you are connecting with a very important community. And I just applaud all of you for showing up for this step. This is not a misstep. What I want to do is I want to go through and talk about the missteps that I've run into, and then like it might give some clues as to missteps that you've taken. We can learn from that and how to maybe not take these missteps. Because when we take a misstep, there's time away from the main path. Now, Shane and I were talking about the title, and he's like, what about mistakes? I was like, yeah, mistakes, but I don't see it as a mistake. We can sort of look at it, and with imposter syndrome, with rejection sensitivity, with our low self-esteem, like, yeah, I mistake, and it's in shame and blame, and we can really pile on. So that wording of it's a misstep, and we don't know it's a misstep until we've kind of gone down that path. So I want to tell sort of my own story here a little bit, and that when I was diagnosed with ADHD, I wasn't really in any kind of shape to manage my ADHD, right? Having ADHD does not always help with managing ADHD. As I said earlier, if you've got imposter syndrome, if you have a rejection sensitivity, I was diagnosed in around 1996, about my 7th year of teaching, and teaching was kicking my butt. So I got a diagnosis, but it wasn't really kind of years later when I was realizing, starting to really kind of engage with my ADHD. All during this time, I've got rejection sensitivity, that raging case of imposter syndrome, and this self-concept of, who am I? Who am I to show up, and who am I to take up space? So those are not great ingredients for kind of taking the lead or taking charge in your ADHD. And so part of that kind of led to some of these missteps. I'm also going to kind of provide how ADHD will show up in these unique situations. So what I'd like from individuals listening in, what I want you to do is I want you to kind of like notice and like, okay, is this misstep like something that I identify with? Is it something that I've experienced? And just sort of like, yep, I identify with it, or I don't identify with this. And we'll go through, and as I go through, I'm going to share a little bit and then prompt you to share in the chat, and then Shane can share some feedback there, just so we can kind of like really, I can sort of engage with you guys real time there. Okay. And so some of these things may resonate, some may not, and that's okay, as you're going along to kind of think about your own missteps and like, what are the missteps that you've bumped into, and to hold it as a misstep and not a mistake. And during the Q&A, we're going to do a little exercise that then you can take sort of the strategy or the multiple step process for how do you engage with a misstep? How do you kind of identify it and then find reverse to back out of that situation and move in a different direction? So I do want it to be engaging. Okay, so misstep number one. Misstep number one is, for me, I was trying to pin down ADHD, right? To sort of like get a picture of, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. And to pin it down before I proceed with addressing it. And you can see there might be, you see the dilemma there is, for me, I try to pin it down and then things would change. Now, my presentation of inattentive ADHD, of the certain quality, the symptoms that I was challenged with were pretty consistent, but it was sort of like kind of life's presentations of like trying to be successful at school, trying to start a coaching business, trying to start a marriage with a new partner, trying to raise kids. Each of these presents a whole new environment, context, and it would kind of change my own ADHD equation or change that picture. So I don't know if you guys like to do this. I see this in my inattentive clients where I call them big brains. Sort of that they love to collect data. They like to collect and collecting the collecting mode. And like, okay, I see this is, and I'm going to collect everything, which is kind of all or nothing behavior. And then I'm going to address it. Going to get research, gather, then I'm going to start managing the active part of doing something about it. And so the misstep here was that I'm always in gathering mode and I was always getting more information. So then I could never pivot to the action phase. And I just want to check is, and the analogy I like is it's kind of like, this is going to date me, right? But back, I want to say it's in the 50s, Pin the Tail on the Donkey. It was a game that they played before TV, before, you know, way back in the day, before my time. Pin the tail on the donkey. So the kids give it a tail, they're blindfolded and go up and you try to pin the tail on the donkey. This is like pinning a tail on the donkey in a tempest or a hurricane. It's like our brain is swirling, stuff swirling around us, and it's very disorienting. And so, as soon as you pin it or like, oh, this is it, it changes. Some new challenge, some new learning, something new happens. So this is a very dynamic experience. Now I was like, okay, let's go ahead and, bundle this thing up, package it up, and then I'm going to deal with it. So does anybody resonate? Does this, first of all, in the chat, just like, is there recognition of this? Is something you do? Is there some variation of this that you experience? Like having to pin it down before you proceed with doing something about it.
So I do this still to this day. I never stop collecting data about these things. Took on a position for the International Conference on ADHD to be connected to people like you and others. And I get to see their research papers and I get to see the talking points. And I'm like, oh, there's a new scientist I need to follow. Or, oh, there's a new psychiatrist that has a book I want to read. And sometimes I get too lost in that.
So, it's like this thing about moving from planning research phase into the actual doing phase. And this is sort of the nuts and bolts of ADHD is that, right? And this is Barclay's statement, right? It's not a disorder of not knowing what to do. It's not doing what you know. But it's like, how do we shift into kind of engaging or into activity? Do you see any other sharing there in the around people identifying with this, Shane?
Yeah, Braden said this is absolutely relatable. It took me so long to finally get past that data collection and into action. Others, Matthew said, yes, it's exhausting, and then I have less energy and interest in the doing because it becomes overwhelming. Sean says, it took me 12 years of suspecting I had ADHD to actually do something about ADHD. Another one was, I can relate to that. I was gathering the information on myself and my behavior. I related to this person with ADHD, but do I see it in myself? Then months
Yeah.
later, managing it on and off myself.
Well, and these guys you're jumping ahead because you're already getting into missteps 3, 4, and 5. So
Yeah.
this is
So
so my big fear, Shane, hang on a sec. My big fear in any of these things is like, we're sitting here and Shane's like, yeah, nothing in the chat, Cam, not a thing, nothing.
nope.
So I'm so appreciative that there's stuff in the chat. You guys it's resonating with you. And go ahead, Shane.
I'm right here with Jonathan. I was studying about ADHD for my son because the teacher is like, hey, we think your son may have ADHD. And I'm like, oh, well, I've got to definitely be the person to stand up for him and be his advocate. So let me research everything there is about ADHD. And then as I'm going through it, I'm going, oh, I feel a lot of this stuff. Wait, other people don't have the monologue in their head and nobody else really goes down all those rabbit holes and oh no. And my wife is a special education teacher. I remember going in there and I was like, Darcy, I think I have ADHD. And I remember her just kind of looking at me and kind of cocking her head to the side. And she's like, you didn't know? And I'm like, no, I didn't know. When did you know? She goes, oh, honey, I knew whenever I read your dating profile. And I was like, why didn't you say anything? And I was like, I was so frustrated because I was like, you're a special education teacher. Why didn't you? And she was like, I just thought you were being a dude about it.
Yeah.
Like trying to like power through it. So
Yeah. So,
yeah.
and actually, you're going to another misstep too. But yes, this sort of how we can collect data on this whole management thing and this desire to like, what am I dealing with? And we want to know this is where perfection, a little black and white thinking of, and it is sort of a cognitive flexibility issue, is that we will kind of create a picture of something and then not want to change that picture. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And so, what to do here is, and Shane, I really appreciate you sharing. From the chat, someone said how exhausting this is. It is absolutely exhausting, especially when you are collecting data and especially now. I mean, I have not seen so much information available. It has just gone up exponentially. So it's like drinking from a fire hose and it's like trying to get the right data. And so we're in this collection mode, and it's very challenging to go from a collecting, research, mapping out mode into the what am I going to do about it mode. What's the activity? What is the practice? And so this kind of thinking about a little bit of sampling and a little bit of exercise or practice, and that to realize your picture is always going to change of what ADHD is to you. And so, like any relationship, your relationship with your ADHD, recognizing it's going to change over time. My relationship and what ADHD is to me now, 30 years into my diagnosis, has changed dramatically. And so it makes sense that if it was very different 5 years ago, it's going to be different 5 years from now. And to kind of take that into consideration and like, okay, what can I work with right now with this? Misstep number 2. So, as someone with low self-esteem, looking for validation, looking for acceptance, having that RSD that's sort of off the chart. And the misstep for me here was seeking acceptance or validation from others that I have ADHD. And sort of this is, I think that, again, people are already sort of talking about this. So it's important to check in with others of like, yeah, I got a diagnosis, or before diagnosis. Like, what are your thoughts here? I've been back to Shane and talking about his wife is like, what are your thoughts? Do you think I have ADHD? What we can do is then we start to kind of go around and are seeking reassurance from others. This reassurance and this sort of like kind of it's like shopping this around of like, yeah, I've got this diagnosis, or I think I have ADHD. And what are your thoughts? That's important. That's really relevant. It's really important to get feedback, to check in with people. Here's the dilemma that I ran into. And I wonder if you are bumping into this too. Is that I would check in with people, and ADHD is something that it's not like anxiety or depression, where people have this wide variety of opinions and strong feelings. People do not have strong feelings or opinions about anxiety or depression or other mental health challenges. But with ADHD, everyone has an opinion. Everyone has not a lot of information about it, but boy, do they have strong feelings. So what I got was no, I don't think you have ADHD. I think, you know, your mom let you stay up too late and watch TV all day, which she didn't. Right. Or, yeah, no, it's like, I think ADHD is something that the pharmaceutical companies just like, it's a chance to over medicate and all of a sudden it goes to something else, something they feel strongly about. And I noticed that I'm kind of getting pulled around with, no, you don't. I'll tell you exactly what you have. So the thing here, the misstep is not so much about I want to invite you to, well, let me back up. When we are in a state of low self-esteem, when we are susceptible to rejection, we are craving validation. Am I okay? Because we're so uncertain. And especially when I get a diagnosis of ADHD and it answers a lot of questions, but then you start sort of seeking reassurance from others. I'll just say be careful or mindful of who you seek that reassurance from. That those people who are supportive, who see you for who you are, and are open and curious, versus, no, this is the situation. This is what's going on. Kind of want to, it's an opportunity to get on their soapbox or lecture you or blah, blah, blah. To focus more on feedback than validation because our wiring is, our brains are wired for getting feedback. We are walking through the world externally focused, seeking feedback. What happens is we take that feedback and it can easily get kind of shifted over into approval or validation or acceptance. Okay. And so when I had a low self-esteem and I have this information, I'm very sensitive about it. And I go, yeah, what do you think? It's like, sure. Yeah, I think so. Oh, thank God. Or no. And so guess what? My experience is getting yo-yoed up and down. I'm going up and down, up and down, up and down of maybe I have it, maybe I don't. Maybe I have it, maybe I don't. So it's something that it's this sort of kind of rationalizing or considering and this deal making with myself. Maybe I am lazy. Maybe I'm lazy, stupid, and crazy. Right. So just that noticing if this is a misstep and to kind of just temper that to really consider who you might ask. And so Shane, back to you again, here's another misstep. And we're not going to do too much here because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for feedback. But does this resonate with folks where you're kind of like shopping around and seeking acceptance, you know, and it's kind of getting you yanked around a little bit?
I actually got told by my first psychiatrist that adults don't have ADHD.
Yeah.
It was just like brain said, I would say, especially people at work, that can backfire big time.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah. Yes. Very much so. Yeah. So just it is, we want to be open and normalize the experience, but that kind of hunting down that desire for validation and to look for evidence, an objective, neutral feedback from folks of, right? And so it's just, if you ask 10 people, about ADHD, they're going to give you 10 opinions on it. It's just a fascinating experience. And so that's misstep number 2. Misstep number 3 is embracing a destination mindset. So, destination mindset is like this, okay, I'll explain my own experiences. When I got diagnosed, I went to an MD, they gave me meds, and it was pretty much, so I'm going to take these meds, it was Ritalin at the time, and then this will all be done. And it was sort of like, they're sitting behind the desk. They sort of, didn't say yes or no, but it was kind of like this reassuring, like, yeah, the meds are going to certainly help. And in my mind, I'm just like, okay, this destination thinking where I'm going to do something and it's just going to return to some normal. I think that there's a belief out there of this, there's a place where I can get to where I don't have to effort anymore. I don't have to entertain demands on my bandwidth or my attention system. So a lot of people sort of seeking out the sort of like automation, but you don't want to conflate that with autopilot, which is I'm going to set everything on auto and kind of like, and I can just sort of be in this sort of place of, I'm done. I'm done with, figuring this thing out. We've gotten to this destination and it's all cool. So you can imagine that the counter to that or the alternative to destination thinking is journey thinking mindset. So Shane said that I co-hosted the Translating ADHD podcast for 4 years with Asher Collins. Asher Collins now does it with another coach, Dusty Chapura. And the backlog of Translating HD, we do a lot around journey thinking mindset. So journey thinking is like, what does that entail? Journey thinking is to kind of think about, I'm on a path, and that it's sort of this continuum. And then that can be really depressing for us, thinking that we can just sort of, teleport to some place that is done. And it's like, I'll just say, how's that working for you? It didn't work well for me. And it took me several times to figure out, like, I would kind of create a picture of success and then think that, okay, if I get to this picture of success, I'm done. Destination thinking. And realize that much like misstep number one, I would get close to it and then things would change, and notice that that thinking wasn't really helping me in daily situations where I really needed to be aware of kind of what's ahead of me and how can I anticipate. And so this sort of being on a path, being on a journey, who's with me, what am I learning as I'm going along, and this idea of that it's okay to make a misstep. It's okay to make a mistake. We're going to make mistakes. And what can I learn from that mistake? When we focus on learning and journey thinking, we start to short circuit that whole system that generates a sense of rejection, shame, blame, or dread. All right. So if you sort of think about what are your 3 or 4 dark horsemen of the apocalypse, mine was dread, shame, blame, and rejection. But guilt is kind of like a cousin to shame. And so those are activated. And it's like with journey thinking, and I'm like giving myself grace, being kind to myself. Like, hey, we mess up, we make mistakes, we take missteps. Kind of like that's the idea of journey thinking. ADHD makes it tough because, again, we like to kind of that cognitive inflexibility piece or cognitive rigidity, kind of like to lock into a picture, and then changing that picture feels like some kind of a failure. So journey thinking is not a failure. It's actually really tuning in with how things present themselves as they're coming up. So do folks resonate with misstep number 3?
Yeah, while we're waiting for people to chat, Braden had said, I think the best validation I ever got was attending the International HD conference. I kind of want to, with me, I'm also autistic. So my black and white thinking was compounded by that. And like, there's supposed to be rules that you're supposed to follow. And like, my brain got locked so hard into thinking that way.
Yeah.
What are the rules I'm supposed to follow? I think that was the most overwhelming part for me, Like, what are the steps I'm supposed to take in this, to make everything right or normal? Matthew actually asked a good question. How do you offer yourself grace and compassion in that journey?
Good question. That's a great question. It's a bit risky, it's a bit vulnerable. When you have low self-esteem or struggling with a sense of self-worth, giving grace or self-compassion feels like a luxury or selfish. Something that I work with my clients is to see yourself in the picture, to take up space, that you have needs, that you are lovable. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A, but it's a little bit of an exercise. All right. Misstep number 4, waiting for others to complain to motivate change. And so I think that, we all agree that we are a tenacious lot. So there's tenacious or tenacity of stick-withedness, the how that plays out, and tenacity and resilience is good. Stubborn is another way that, like, if your partner or someone calls you stubborn, it's like, well, another way to look at that is tenacious. And we can often sort of tolerate kind of conditions, sort of to tolerate, and this sort of justifying inaction. This is especially true for the inattentive type. So inattentives are trying to cobble together energy, especially energy to activate for task. The impulsive or combined type or hyperactive impulsive, I call them the fast brains. They often have an excess of energy, and so they're trying to sort of shed energy, be able to tap brakes. But this sort of, again, either starting something or changing direction is really tough, and it can feel overwhelming for us. So we have to be able to have self-talk to sort of justify or feel good about things. We can justify inaction. We can justify staying the course. And there's something that one of my business clients told me about is like, oh, that's like the cost of doing nothing. I'm like, the cost of doing nothing? He's like, yeah. It's like if you are my nephew is an engineer at a power plant. And so he's the vibration guy, right? He's the vibration specialist. He heard a vibration. He was like, we got to shut this down. And he got so much pushback from that because shutting down a power plant is like losing millions of dollars in days. So this whole idea of like upgrading or doing maintenance, attending to these, like go ahead and tuning your car, right? Keeping it maintained. We can put those things off because it's like, okay, we can tolerate this. The story here is a really unfortunate one. So I teach a class for individuals who are wanting to improve their relationship, and it's through Melissa Orloff. And so she runs the ADHD marriage. Most of the people that take my class, and they've done the seminar with their partner, and then they come into my class, which is for the ADHD partner. So they're trying to improve their relationship. And that's often when they come to Melissa's program, things are not great. And so it's sort of often the case where there's a downplaying or discounting the impact of ADHD until they get really bad. And the unfortunate thing that happens is, you know, around 20 to 30% of the participants in my class, I would say that out of all of them, around 20 to 30%, they've gotten to the point of no return. These Gottman, what's called these sort of the Gottman emotions of contempt, resentment have established, and trust is gone. And so it's like the partner's already made up their mind. And this is an unfortunate thing that happens is, my wife and I were on the outs. There was a point where we were thinking of splitting up because it was so tough. And I was sort of kind of just allowing it sort of ride, like, hey, it's not that bad. And then when she finally complained, there was a lot of trust lost. And so this was a huge misstep for me, was this sort of waiting for it to get really bad and really bad for others. I also see this in work situations where someone comes to me and is like, I think I'm about to lose my job. And it's like, we get going and it's too late. They've already made up their mind and moved on. They've tolerated, tolerated, tolerated. And it's like, yeah, no, this is not tenable. We are waiters because we are reactors. We're sort of in tune with the things around us, that it's like somehow pivoting here is really important to start to create change and not necessarily wait for those complaints or the stuff getting into the suggestion box to come in. So just get pause and is like, does this resonate for you? And this might bring up some really strong emotions, and just, let the emotion come and let it pass. And we can talk about this in a moment. I'm going to go ahead and put myself on mute, but just sort of you can put it in the chat. And when I come back, we can look at it.
So yeah, go ahead and drop it in the chat. What are some ways where you like maybe you weren't waiting for it, but you waited for others to complain, and that's what motivated you to change? I know I posted earlier, like we see a lot of this in the men's group where people are coming in and they're talking about, hey, I really needed to start taking this ADHD seriously, or I need to take my mental health more seriously.
Yeah.
My wife or my husband thinks that I am, failing all the time. I'm struggling so much and I don't seem to be doing anything about it. And so, like, there's a lot of that in the chat. Jonathan said, I don't know if I was waiting for complaints to make a change, but there were and are some. Yep. Sean said, jobs lost and 2 marriages later. Braden said, interestingly, I almost felt like it was the opposite for me, where I was getting so much criticism that I almost ignored it. Yeah.
I'm going to hold that and we'll come back to that in the Q&A because I'm just about done here.
Yeah.
So good stuff. Not easy stuff. Good because it's sort of, again, that it's resonating. You guys are connecting around this stuff, which is the good part. It's definitely not easy though. And then finally, just the last one. And this is tough. It's sort of like, and I'm going to guess that some of you are out there like, well, what is ownership, Cam? What even is ownership? I can't even define ownership. So misstep 5 is not taking ownership of your own ADHD management. Let's start with what it's not. This is, again, in the work that I do in the couples work, where I'm working with the ADHD partner in often a dynamic where there's neurotypical or non-ADHD partner, and then there's the ADHD partner. 8 times out of 10, it's the man has ADHD because the woman has identified with Melissa's story. Melissa Orloff wrote a book, The ADHD Effect on Marriage, and how she wrote her own story of living with her husband who did not take ownership. And so she was sort of left with the bag, or kind of left with the efforting, the managing, the emotional labor, raising the kids. And so this sort of back to this idea of like letting my wife do things that I could easily contribute with. And sort of like, oh, she sort of seems to do it in her sleep. Right? Just like packing lunches for kids, or, taking initiative around where do you want to vacation. And so that was me not taking ownership, was kind of floating through. And whenever she'd say something, like, where do you want to eat? And I'd be like, hey, I'm easy wherever you want to, hon. I'd put it right back to her, right? Thinking I was being easy and amenable when in fact, she's really wanting some contributions, initiative. And if you are in relationship, and I didn't want to make this about relationships, but many of us are in relationships and our partners are wanting two things that I've noticed. They want to be heard, which is us giving our attention, which is tough. So to be heard and appreciated, it's one. And then the other is, I'll use this finger, to for their partners to take the initiative somewhere. Take the initiative. So there's one guy who's very successful in his job, and what we do together is we just work on where he can take the initiative with his partner around things like vacation or trips, activities, the sort of social stuff that's not interesting to him. He's like, I recognize it's not interesting. It's boring planning a trip, but I know it really matters to my partner. So taking ownership, or sort of, again, it can feel really big, taking ownership, and exactly like, well, what exactly is that? The place to begin there is to think about, where can you take the initiative someplace? And I would suggest taking the initiative on your own, identifying a need you have in the area of self-care, right? To address sleep, to address consistent meds or meditation, nutrition, some kind of self-care activity for yourself, that you take that and take the initiative there, to take ownership of that. And yes, it's like, well, I start something, Cam, and I do it for 2 weeks and then it drops off because I focus on something else. And so that's that journey thinking, to be able to like, oh, I, dropped the ball here because I was over here and I let this thing go. And so how do I get back to it? How do I get back? We assume that we're going to like start, like destination thinking. I'm going to start this self-care practice and it's just I'm going to lock it in. That's not ever the case. Things happen, things jostle our routine. We get knocked off our practices. And it's this, how do we get back to what we know? And back to that, how do we get back to the wisdom that we've already created? So taking ownership is, don't look at it like this large, massive, overwhelming thing, is to identify where's a place. If you have a partner, it's like, hey, I just got off this thing. And I'm like, one of the steps was about taking ownership. So where would you like me to take some more ownership, or where would you like me to take the initiative? Is there a specific area? So specificity and clear expectation, right? Again, if that person is amenable to, and if the relationship is healthy and constructive. Also, is that going ahead, and there's another thing that we do is we are the choice we make. It's like, I got to make the right choice, and I'm fearful I'm going to make the wrong choice. That is a mindset that is built for urgency. And so taking ownership is not about urgency. So you may pick something and it might not be exactly the right thing, but you're probably in the right ballpark. So that's the extent of my talk. I got one more slide with some action plans, but what I want to do is move to the Q&A and what questions you have regarding these missteps. What are some missteps that I didn't name that you identify with? And then we can together as a group start to problem solve and work on some solution sets here. Be in community and put our minds together to look at how might we solve these dilemmas.
I know one thing on this ownership thing. I remember my wife and I were really struggling because I was not doing enough chores around the house and things of that nature. She's a special education teacher and made the, like, she should be used to this, like helping people. And I had forgotten that when she gets home, she's off work and she needs to be off work. But I had asked her to kind of like, hey, can you remind me to do the dishes every now and then if you see that they're not done? And can you kind of help me remember to change the laundry over? And my brain had went into this mode of depending on her to remind me to do these chores, which
Yeah.
created an imbalance. And a part of what I wound up doing is I took all the chores that I was supposed to be doing on a regular basis as a stay-at-home father and put them into a spreadsheet and then took that and put it into Alexa. And now Alexa tells me to do those things. And it's a woman's voice, so it's enough to trigger the yes no decision making instead of like, what do I need to do today? There's a very specific thing that's telling me to do a thing. And I have to say, yes, I will do it, or no, I won't do it because I'm in this thing. And that was a misstep at first. And she did communicate, like, she put a boundary in place. Like, I don't want to have to be doing that all the time.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? That's perfectly fair. And she explained to me, like, when I get home from work, I want to be done from work and I don't want to have to tell you what to do. Like, I have to tell my students what to do. And I'm like, that's a really good point. Now, we had built years and years of communication strategies and stuff like that because I did the work, she did the work, and things of that nature. So we had that, but there's a lot of people out there who make that mistake. And, it comes back to bite them because it creates an imbalance. And we actually have a really cool video with Dusty Japura. You were talking about the imbalance between relationships, and she came on a couple of months ago. It's on our YouTube channel, and she talks about this very thing. Sean said, great suggestion. I think my wife appreciates my spontaneity, but I'll see where she wants me to pitch in more. There you go.
Yeah. And so the Q&A, do we
Mm-hmm.
want to go ahead and open up
Yep.
to
Yep.
live?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if y'all have any questions or anything like that, drop them in the chat. I'll ask them, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Great.
In the meantime, I actually have some questions that were submitted from other people. They've paid, and so forth and so on. All right. One of them is actually really relevant to this. My wife handles all the schedules, bills, and kid stuff, and she's good at it. I'm not, but she's getting resentful, and honestly, I feel like a useless partner. How do I step up without screwing everything up worse?
Yeah. And that's right in line with is like my partner just it seemed like it was so effortless. Like she's got this dialed in. And if I get in here, it's just going to mess things up. Good question. If you're identifying resentment, you want to start to address that head on, right? If your partner is feeling resentful, that means that trust is eroding. And you want to think about how can you create connection and create that trust. So right there, that assumption of, well, if I pitch in, what's front and center for the person that's asking this question is, how do I not screw up? And it's sort of like, okay, I'm worried about screwing up. And can I set that aside and come back to what's the greater good? The greater good is that I can help out. And so to have a frank conversation about specific areas of help, to get super specific of, okay, what's something that I can take on that is mine, that's very specific, and to talk about, what are the expectations there? Now, the thing about it's like this is not just part of the dynamic here is that it takes two to engage. And the person with ADHD is not the only person at fault. So Melissa talks about sort of parent-child dynamic. This is sort of like a parent-child dynamic where there's the parental and then the kind of this, and at times I'd feel like it's like another child in the family. And you can't come and engage as a child. You have to come as a partner and like identify and speak to the dilemma and then your willingness to resolve the situation. So starting with honesty, frankness, and you have something to contribute. And where can you contribute that? Where specifically? I would say start super, very specific and small, and then build out from there.
Yeah, I remember like my wife just wanted me to try. Like that's all she cared about, really. She just wanted me to show like effort in trying to do the things.
Right.
Like
And so that right there of like getting to the want, like what is your partner wanting? So that's gold for you, Shane. Sorry to interrupt, but it's like that's a nugget that you could really, it was like, I just want you to try. Oh, try? Okay. Now I can get my head around that and what that means, or to further that conversation. So it's like, what is the need and what is it that they're wanting? What does that contribution look like? So good.
she actually didn't have a problem like prompting me every now and then, and she still to this day will prompt me every now and then to remind me like to change over clothes and stuff like that. She'll send me a quick message, but it's because I put in place a system, my own system, for me to at least start things and like putting the clothes in the washing machine on my own with Alexa saying something to me about it. But, you know, she wanted to see that effort. And then she was willing to also make the effort alongside of me, which that's kind of how we like bridge that resentment gap is start doing the things together and then working out the compromise between the two expectations. Yes, she's totally fine with helping me remind me every now and then if she sees me already doing a chunk of it on my own.
Yeah.
I want to circle back to Matthew's question about how do you offer yourself grace and compassion on this
Mm,
journey?
that's a really good question. And I think it's going to be different for different folks. Matthew, I mean, it's just like what happens when it's just for context, what happens when you try? Could you put that and then Shane can, so I'm going to counter with a question. What happens when you try to offer grace and compassion?
Matthew did post it. It feels weird to do it. I feel like I'm not worth giving it.
So what's really interesting about any kind of change, right? We're talking about change. And so I just got off the phone with someone who the operative word was striving, right? They're always striving. They have ADHD plus anxiety. And it is a woman who is a professional and she's 70. She's still working. She likely has enough to retire, but she's not quite sure. But she has this sort of mode of being in the world of her upbringing was around achievement and, you know, don't let up. So she also has that high energy ADHD I see with sort of the achiever and kind of like the go, 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 just relentless. Today, she talked about bringing time and space into her life in some kind of artistic outlet. And this is brand new. And the reason why I bring it up is because it's like a foreign concept. And foreign concepts or new behaviors, guess what? They feel weird. When you start something new, they feel weird. So, Matthew, I just heard what you said of like, yeah, it kind of feels weird and I'm not deserving. And I'll say, let it be weird and continue to practice it. Finding language, but this, so my client is like, she is trying to like have sort of space to just do something without some, you know, striving for a paycheck or, recognition or status or something, to just do something that's artistic and creative and just be. And she was like, this is not me, Cam. So if you're not used to kind of being kind to yourself, it's going to feel weird. And that to allow it to be weird and to do it anyway. I spent a lot of time and energy being hard on myself because I thought being hard on myself was the way forward. It was like, you know, well, you screw up, like you don't mess this up. So sort of this internal drill sergeant to kind of keep the pressure on. Back to that, we are pretty good at responding and reacting to situations when we have kind of urgency and pressure. That can really have a toll on our mental health of, that constant berating. So the other thing to do, Matthew, is there's the attaboy or like, hey, okay, you messed up there. Maybe don't be so hard. I won't be so hard on myself, right? Distinguishing guilt and shame, as I said earlier, shame is I am the mess up, right? It is this sort of personification of I am the failure. And if you're getting that echoed around you of like, yeah, you're the one that's messing up here, that's not fair play. You're struggling with this condition that is so hard to address because the mechanism impacts that addressing ability, right? The ability to name it. This is what I'm going to do and do it. This is ADHD. So, right there, of kind of starting to back off the intensity of, right? And sort of like, okay, I messed up versus I am the mess up. So, that subtle change of language. The other thing I'll say is if it's hard to give grace, then work on the other side, which is really take the foot off of the self-criticism, right? To notice the self-judgment, the berating, and if you can sort of like, oh, I'm doing it again. Oh, I'm doing it again. You know what? I made a promise myself. I'm not going to like bring the harsh inner critic, the judge, the saboteur. I'm not going to bring the hammer this week, right? Or at least I'm not going to bring the sledgehammer. So lightening up on that can be a starting place. And Matthew, good luck with that.
Yeah, like I constantly I do this for myself and I do it to my friends and my clients where somebody will sit here and they'll be taking that shame on themselves and I'll be like, can you just like tell the monkey to get off your shoulder? Like I anthropomorphize my imposter syndrome into this like I think of the evil monkey on your shoulder and I just like, can you just tell it to F off?
Yeah.
Please, like let's just go ahead and change that language around it. Like what can we learn from what the mistake that was made, you
Yeah.
know? And another thing that I want to call Mark out on this one. Mark is an amazing boss. I love working with Mark because Mark goes out of his way on a regular basis to tell me he appreciates what I'm doing.
Mhm.
And to this day, I still feel like that's so weird to hear from somebody. Like when people give me compliments and they tell me if I'm doing a good job and things of that nature, I feel so weird when I hear that. And over the years, though, with Mark consistently doing it and other people that I've met within the men's group consistently doing it, and now clients doing it, and now like people emailing me about talks that I've done, and the weird goes away mostly. I still get that niggling weird feeling in the back of my head whenever it happens, but with practice, it gets better.
Yeah.
So we've got another question that was submitted through the chat.
Can I
Oh
just
yeah, go ahead, Mark.
so funny enough, like when Shane said the amazing boss comment, I'm like, like, really? Like, I'm all right. Like, I was basically feeling the exact same thing that you had mentioned. But I mean all the wonderful things that I say about you, Shane. And I dropped the comment, funny enough, like right when you were saying that. But Cam, I'm also going to throw a compliment your way as I head out. I think you're wonderful. Your answers have been amazing and such a great resource throughout this whole presentation. So thank you so much for this. And thank you, everybody, for joining this tonight. Sorry, y'all. I'm heading out now.
All right, Mark. Thanks.
All right. Sean says this is so relatable. My favorite boss was great with praise. I've just realized how that motivated me.
Yes.
I want to talk about something as far as that's concerned real quick, and then we'll get into another question that was submitted through the chat
Sure.
personally. Dr. Ned Hallowell talks about recognition response euphoria. And I don't know what your opinion on that is, but I have definitely found that while, yes, it does sound weird to me, I definitely get jazzed up when people tell me. Like, I got an email from a pretty prominent person in the ADHD community a few weeks ago for a talk I did. And I'm sharing it to all my friends group. Oh my God, did y'all see this? Y'all have got to check this out. I got this compliment. Oh my God. And I was so excited and stoked about it. And what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are I'm tired of people giving these scientific names to something that is very natural.
Yeah.
So, William Dodson, I appreciate all of his work, but Dodson talks about RSD and rejection sensitive dysphoria. That has been accepted. And so, RSD, or this strong physical sensation of rejection, is very real. But I take this terminology with a grain of salt. So, recognition response euphoria. Okay, you feel good when someone gives you heartfelt feedback. Is that what you're saying, Shane?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I just got off the phone with somebody who is very successful, like kind of just ridiculous. They're talented. They do so much in the world. And we're talking around this individual who has ADHD, by the way. And it was like, yeah, I noticed that when I appreciate them, they really light up. This whole connection thing and our desire for validation, our desire for getting some kind of feedback. Is it recognition response euphoria? Or is it just this, yeah, a human response? I do think that it's something that we really value. I'll say is that when we become dependent upon it is the dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
And this sort of, we're hoping others will fill our well when the water's always running out because of the ADHD, right? Everyone talks about losing their keys or setting aside, they put their list down, their grocery list, and they forget it. People, we forget our who and our why and our sense of self all the time. It's always slipping away. So we need to have ways to kind of be reminded of our who, that we do belong to take up space in the world. And so, yeah, when we get it from someone else and it's heartfelt, it's the best thing in the world. I love it. I teach classes, and so I'm a pretty good trainer, and I get lots of positive feedback from my students. But I also am careful, I'm mindful of that doing my own, like putting my own water in the well and patching that well up because the water runs out. And it's just a natural ADHD thing of I wake up in the morning and I don't have hope. It's not that I have despair, but it's just sort of like this empty vessel that I've got to kind of orient and tether and like, oh yeah, right. I'm this guy and I take up space in the world and I've got to kind of coach myself to kind of to fill that water up, to kind of have that sense of self. And so we want to, I found that it's making contributions and doing adding value is very helpful and kind of, you know, It's really important. What you're doing, Shane, is amazing. And so that kind of, I'm just going to challenge you to, yeah, let the attaboys land from the outside, but to kind of nurture the attaboy on the inside too.
Oh yeah. I it's been hard, but I still use like, hey, I hate to humble brag about this, but I'm gonna humble brag about it. I still use that one as my little qualifier to not sound arrogant, to not sound,
Yeah.
egotistical.
Yeah, we definitely want to do that, right?
Right. And so I like to temper it, but at the same time, I am really proud of the work that we do and that I do, personally
Right.
speaking.
Yes.
Do we
And
have
and
time?
and hang on once, and I'll say there, Matthew, there's a like that. Did you hear that? Right. Again, how do I give myself grace? It's like, how do I speak to myself positively? And right there is a skill. There's a technique that Shane has. Is like just that kind of little, qualifier, humble brag, kind of like opens that door that you can then, yeah, I did this. I showed up this way. I, this happened. So great. Okay, one more.
I realized there's a good parent thing. I was vacuuming the floor, and my daughter, who was like 4 or 5 at the time, this is how I knew I won as a parent. She looked at me, she goes, Daddy, you did such a good job with the living room. I'm proud of you. I'm gonna tell you, I cried for a good 10 minutes on that one.
Yeah.
Oh my God. But because I have been doing it so much with them and their mom does it so much with them, they knew to do it. And we had taught them that. One more question and see if anybody else.
Yeah, and I'll
Uh,
do one more question, and I've got one more slide to share
mhm.
just to kind of recap,
Yeah.
that gives a little parting multi-step process here.
Yeah. The last question, my ex left because I was unreliable. Now
Mm.
I'm trying to date again. How do I explain that I might forget things like an anniversary, or I may leave the dishes in the sink for a week without sounding like a total disaster? Don't leave
Um,
dishes in the sink for a
yeah,
week.
I was gonna say, let's not do a week, man. Maybe a couple days. Maybe
Most use disposable dishes. I've actually told a client that, like, hey, if you have a problem with dishes and it's a serious problem, use disposable dishes. But how do we talk to people who are dating and getting into that relationship about ADHD and the struggles without sounding like we're just completely like hopeless?
Yeah, and the other, it's like to talk about it in a way beyond sort of like, well, I have ADHD. And so that's a great question. This is around, I thought it would be one of my, I'm looking at my list here. It's not here, but I will say I would add it to it is to advocating for oneself and to sort of seek out, to explore, what matters. When you're dating and you're starting to, it's like, what's important to them? I'm amazed at the number of like spouses who value order and control that they think it's a good idea to marry someone with ADHD. I was like, what is that? Like, if you value order and control, it's like, I think I want a little spontaneity and this person's kind of fun and exciting. It's that kind of exploring early on of, okay, what are the things that are important to you? What are the things that annoy you? And so this sort of, I'll put stuff in the sink. Now, just that kind of having conversations about what you're willing to tolerate. And that if that's something that they're not willing to tolerate, then that's not someone that you want to necessarily, continue on. You don't want to set someone up to be that nag. And you don't want to be in that position to be back to where you were, or like making an assumption here, but that's sort of the receiver of the kind of the hammering there. When are these dishes going to go? Da, 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 da. So it's like really having a heartfelt conversation of what matters. My house is not always picked up. It's a little bit messy, but I get to it eventually. Are you okay with that? And so it starts with just honest conversation and advocating for yourself, and also like what matters to you. This is back to seeing yourself in the picture. I think that sometimes it's like, oh, you know, I'm lucky that anyone has interest in me. That's not seeing yourself in the picture. And I'm not suggesting the person asking this question is suggesting that, but to kind of like see yourself in the picture that, you know, your ADHD is a part of your experience and sort of like share that and what they're okay with and what they're not okay with.
Kind of gets back to what you were saying about window of tolerance. Like, what is their window of tolerance for the certain things that you struggle with?
Yeah, exactly.
And like, what are they willing to work with you on? What are they willing to compromise?
Right.
Like, those are early conversations that should be had, like, I don't know, date 5 or 6 before things get too serious. Maybe date 3 or 4, since we have ADHD and we hyperfixate on people.
Right.
You know, so go ahead and share your final slide.
So just this, I was just thinking about like, okay, what's something that people can walk away with? So I'm just going to put it up here for a couple minutes. This sort of step of the action steps here. And it's just down the left side, you can sort of see, you know, a single word here. And so if you want to take a screenshot of this or you're going to have the video, but first and foremost and most important is the awareness. And I like to say that awareness feels like this going backwards thing that we kind of would rather like not look, because when we have awareness, but then we can't do something about it because that's the ADHD thing. Like change always, you know, awareness always outpaces change. So we get awareness like, ooh, I do that. Oh no. And so that giving grace and sort of recognizing the misstep perspective is this sort of stepping back and looking at the bigger picture. We're wired for context and to kind of consider, you know, I messed up, right? We're narrow focus, we're in the box and like, yeah, I'm such a screw up. And like, wait a sec. There could be other extenuating circumstances that are contributing to this misstep. So take a step back, be kind and validate yourself. Or, you know, yeah, I messed up, but I'm not the mess up. That compassion, commune, to commune, you know, when I went to this retreat, I was communing in nature. We're communing here to commune with, to come together to have a conversation. So, this communing of sharing notes with a friend, again, a safe space where it's like, yeah, you know, I messed this up. And from there to look at getting curious and exploring other choices. Curiosity is this sort of gateway emotion to the positive side, right? To be curious. You cannot have shame and judgment and also be curious at the same time. You cannot be curious and be hammering yourself. So to genuinely be curious and open. We are a curious bunch. We're a creative bunch. But if we are in the down in the negative spiral of despair, it's really hard to be curious. Back to misstep number 1 of that, all that stuff that's happening. We're collecting data and it's like, I'm collecting, and we can't, it's hard for us to sort of set that down and okay, what's the step I'm going to take? Take the step, try something new, and evaluate objectively of, you know, look back and reflect on what worked and what didn't work. And again, bring compassion there. So there's a couple steps there. I would throw in, you know, let's toss in advocate somewhere along the line there. It might be that you have to advocate. So, all right, there we go.
Thank you so much. I couldn't help but whenever you were talking about the be curious, not judgmental, but thinking about the Ted Lasso show, whenever he's quoting a quote that's supposed to be by Walt Whitman about be curious, not judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
I love that because you're absolutely right. It's very hard to be judgmental when you're going, why did I do that? Okay, well, let's look into it and actually being curious and taking the next step of actually looking into it and going, all right, this has been amazing. I really appreciate it. This is, I mean, seeing some of the stuff that even I was able to, like, I'm this coach of X number of years and being reminded of the journey that I've been making and the missteps I made, but that I learned from. And the missteps that a lot of people out there may not make now that you've posted this and we're talking about this kind of stuff. I look to the future of the good that I think this is going to do for the men's group and for anybody who's watching this. For everyone out there, if y'all appreciated this, if y'all enjoyed this, there'll be a comment in the first link about how you can donate and give to the men's ADHD support group. Remember to follow, like, and share all of our content. We greatly appreciate all of the work that everyone out there is doing for yourself. Thank y'all again. And again, Cam, thank you so much.
Shane, thanks for having me. Been awesome. Thanks, everybody.